Good evening and welcome to Global Lens News. I'm Sadia Afzal. What happens when a president enters a controversial war and instead of uniting the country ends up dividing not just the opposition but even his own side? Right now, Donald Trump is facing one of the most intense waves of criticism of his presidency, and it's all centered around the growing tensions and conflicts with Iran. The situation has quickly turned into more than just a foreign policy debate. It's become a political storm inside the United States, one that's pulling in Democrats, Republicans, and even Trump's own supporters in very different ways. From the beginning, the Iran conflict has been controversial. Many Americans are questioning whether it was necessary, whether it was handled properly, and most importantly, what the long-term consequences might be. Wars tend to rally public support early on, but this one hasn't followed that pattern. Instead, skepticism showed up almost immediately. Rising fuel prices, economic pressure, and fears of a prolonged military entanglement have made people uneasy. For many, it doesn't feel like a clear, decisive strategy. It feels uncertain. Democrats have been the most vocal critics, and their opposition has been sharp and consistent. Many argue that the conflict was avoidable and that it risks making the United States less secure rather than more. There are also serious concerns about whether proper constitutional procedures were followed. Under US law, Congress is supposed to play a key role in authorizing military action, and critics say that line has been blurred or completely ignored. Beyond the legal arguments, there is also a broader concern about stability. Some Democrats believe this conflict could escalate into something much bigger, pulling the US into a long and costly war in the Middle East once again. But what's more surprising is that criticism isn't just coming from Democrats. Within the Republican Party, there is still strong support for Trump, but it's no longer as unified as it was once. Some Republicans are starting to express concerns, particularly when it comes to economic impact and political risks. Wars are expensive, and when they start affecting everyday costs like fuel and inflation, voters do notice. There's also a growing worry among some conservatives that a prolonged conflict could hurt the party in upcoming elections. This doesn't mean Republicans are turning against Trump in large numbers, but it does mean there are cracks forming beneath the surface. A few lawmakers have been shown a willingness to challenge or limit presidential war powers, which is significant in a party that has largely stood behind Trump for years. Among younger voters and independents who lean Republican, the support for this conflict appears even less certain. At the same time, Trump's core base remains strongly loyal. Many of his supporters see the situation very differently. They argue that taking a hard stance against Iran is necessary, especially when it comes to nuclear threats and regional influence. From their perspective, strength and aggression are not problems, they are solutions. They believe previous administrations were too soft and that this approach sends a clear message. Trump himself has leaned into that narrative. He has framed the conflict as a matter of national strength and security, often portraying critics as weak or even unpatriotic. That kind of messaging resonates deeply with his base, reinforcing the idea that he is a leader willing to take bold, decisive action where others would hesitate. But outside of that core support, the numbers are becoming harder to ignore. Approval ratings have been slipping, and disapproval is rising. Independent voters who often decide elections are showing increasing dissatisfaction. That's a major warning sign for any president, especially with elections always on the horizon. When a war starts affecting both perception and everyday economic reality, it stops being just a foreign policy issue. It becomes a domestic political problem. And then there is one of the most dramatic developments in this entire situation: renewed discussion around the 25th Amendment to the United States Constitution. This is not something that comes up lightly. The 25th Amendment allows for a president to be removed from power if they are deemed unable to perform their duties. It's an extreme measure, and historically, it has almost never been used in this way. The fact that it's even being mentioned tells you how intense the political climate has become. Some critics have raised concerns about decision-making, rhetoric, and the handling of such a high-stakes international conflict. However, it's important to understand the reality here. Invoking the 25th Amendment would require support from the Vice President and a majority of the cabinet. That's an incredibly high bar, and at this point, there is no clear indication that such a move is actually close to happening. Still, politically, the conversation itself matters. It signals a level of concern and division that goes beyond normal policy disagreements. It shows that for some, this is not just about whether the war is right or wrong. It's about leadership, judgment, and stability. So where does all of this leave things? The United States finds itself in a deeply divided moment. On one side, there are those who believe this conflict is justified and a show of strength in a dangerous world. On the other hand, there are those who see it as risky and potentially damaging move that could have long-term consequences, both abroad and at home. Trump stands right at the center of that divide. His leadership style, bold, controversial, and unapologetic, continues to energize his supporters while intensifying opposition from critics. But as the Iran situation unfolds, the real question is whether that approach will hold politically, especially as public opinion shifts and pressure builds from multiple directions. Because in the end, wars are not just fought on battlefields. They are fought in public opinion, in political institutions, and in the long-term judgment of history. And right now, that battle is just getting started. This is Sadia Afzal for Global Lens News.